Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to Reddit Scary Stories. In this video, you're going to hear a bunch of spooky and creepy stories that will keep you hooked. Trust me, they're really good, and you'll want to listen to the end. Whether you're trying to fall asleep or just need something while you study, these stories are perfect for that. So stick around and enjoy the scares. Also, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, it helps out the channel. Alright. Let's get into some scary Reddit stories. Story 1. It breathes, it bleeds, it breeds. I have always been a sick child. It was never bad enough to warrant a trip to the hospital, but it was always something that was hanging over me. I was smaller and less energetic than most kids my age. While they preferred to run around and play outside, I chose to stay inside and read. The slightest bit of activity exhausts me for days on end. It wasn't a bad life, but I can certainly see how it made me into the introverted person I am today. I took comfort in books, and I experienced the world through them. It wasn't until I turned 23 that I began to question myself. Everyone around me seemed to be getting married and settling down, but I wasn't. I had a few friends at work, but no one who I hung out with in my free time. My family was gone. I lost my father at a very young age to a heart attack brought on by a lifetime of high cholesterol. And my mother passed away shortly after I graduated college from an extremely malignant form of pancreatic adenocarcinoma. My mother clung on to life for a few weeks before her body shut down. I remember my last memory of her in the hospital. She was so thin that it looked like the slightest breeze would take her from me. Her eyes were bright and feverish, and her skin was yellowed like the pages of an old book. The palliative Demerol they were giving her to ease her into her final moments robbed her of any coherent last words. She just stared at me with her glassy eyes as the end came for her. I clutched her hand in mine, but it was like she wasn't even there. I told her I loved her. She didn't respond. She just closed her eyes and let everything go. I decided that it was time for me to do the same. I had no close family nearby or any real friends. I was alone in the world. I put in my 2 weeks' notice at the small company that was gracious enough to hire me fresh-eyed out of college and left town shortly after my mother's funeral. In all honesty, I didn't want to stay there any longer. Everything reminded me of what was gone and what I was missing out on. After selling our house and settling the matter of her will, I had enough to get far away. I chose the countryside. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts for a while. I felt like I needed some time to work through everything and decide on my next course of action. My inheritance afforded me that privilege. In hindsight, I realized that this was the worst possible choice in my life. Living alone with only my thoughts to keep me company, a mile away from my closest neighbor, only served to deepen my sense of isolation. I was alone with my thoughts, and I quickly realized that none of them were good. I think my mental state only quickened my descent into sickness. Everything began when I noticed a small mass on my left upper arm just underneath the skin. The growth was about the size of a pea, and I could move it around under my skin about 1/4 of an inch or so in each direction. At first I told myself that it was a fatty deposit and nothing to be concerned about. Under palpation I experienced a slight discomfort, but no more than when manipulating any other section of my body. It wasn't until I noticed that it was slowly growing that I began to get concerned. I eventually broke down and went to see a doctor who assured me that it was likely a lipoma or xanthoma and was nothing to be concerned about. He reassured me that it was more likely a symptom of high cholesterol rather than a sign of cancer. He explained that while family history and genetics had given me a bad hand, that didn't necessarily mean I couldn't live a long, healthy life. I was still unsure about the lump, which led to me asking if we could biopsy it. He reasoned that there was no real need to do so. that they were harmless. Since the mass was movable under my skin, that meant that it was encapsulated and was likely benign. He said that getting a sample would only confirm what we already knew and would cost me about $400. He advised me to cut back on my red meats and to come back if I noticed any change in the lipoma. I thanked him and left the hospital feeling comforted. That reassurance lasted about a month. For the first days, I was constantly poking and prodding the small lump. After about a week, when I was confident that the mass hadn't grown any, I went back to my usual life of solitude. I woke up late every morning and read. I did some minor chores around the house and thought about what direction I wanted my life to go in and what field I wanted to work in. Sometimes I would go days without talking to anyone. Looking back, I now realize how unhealthy it was to isolate myself after my mother's unexpected death. I was stagnating, and I didn't even realize it. About a month after getting my lipoma checked out, I began to experience a stinging pain in my upper left arm. That discomfort brought back the memory of my visit to the doctor. The mass on my arm was now dime-sized. I could still move it, but now the slightest touch felt like I was being poked with a needle. I left it alone for a few days, hoping against hope that this was all my imagination running rampant, but the pain continued. I think some sad part of me thought that it would go away if I ignored the issue long enough. To be honest, I was worried about going back to the hospital. That was partially due to the fact that I was afraid of what the diagnosis would be. A growth can be a symptom of cancer. My mother's experience in the hospital also kept me from going. I lived with the slowly growing mass for about a week before I realized how dire the situation was. It wasn't until I woke up one night with a stinging pain in my arm that I decided to go back to the doctor. I rolled out of bed and went to the bathroom to look at my arm. I figured that I had slept on my arm wrong or possibly struck it against something, and that was what was causing me pain. I realized I was wrong when I flipped on the light switch and saw a small bit of caked blood around the area on my upper arm. I hopped into the shower to wash away the silver dollar-sized splotch of blood and had a startling realization. There was a fingernail sticking out of my arm. At first, I thought that I had inadvertently rolled over and accidentally jabbed a clipped toenail into my skin, but as I went to pull it, I experienced a sudden tearing pain that actually made me gasp. It felt like I grabbed a nerve ending and pulled on it. I rinsed off the area and examined it. The nail appeared to be sticking out of my skin rather than piercing it. When I painfully shifted the lipoma, the nail wiggled and receded further into my skin as if it was part of the mass itself. I made up my mind then and there to go to the doctor first thing in the morning. At first, the doctor tried to rationalize it the same way that I did. He said it was likely a lipoma, and my constant worrying was just making it more pronounced. It wasn't until after I showed him the area that he began to take me serious. He concluded that the skin ruptured outward instead of inwards, which meant that it had come from under my skin and poked out. I asked if he would excise the lump so we could examine it, and he agreed due to possible risks of infection and identifying the cause for the growth. I turned down his offer for a general anesthetic. He tried to convince me that it would be easier with one, but I asked for a local anesthetic instead. I remembered my mother's final moments. Even if it was going to be a simple procedure, I didn't want to experience anything like that ever in my life. A part of me realized that it was my fear of being in the same situation as her that made me so stubborn about the anesthetics. After he explained the procedure to me and its risks, I followed him into an operating room, laid down on the table, and waited for him to begin. I did my best to look away while he worked. I imagined turning my head to see what was happening, only to sneeze into the open wound or faint from the mere sight of the surgery. I did gather enough courage to look towards the end. I looked up into the mirror to see about an inch of skin peeled away with a slightly red mass beneath it. It didn't look nearly as grotesque or sickening as I thought. Instead, it looked clinical and clean. He set an object in the tray and proclaimed, "Think I got it? Now let's just see what we have." I heard him drop the heavy tweezers on the ground as if something had shocked him. I went to look, but he told me I needed to stay still until he could suture up the area. He reassured me that the utensil had just slipped out of his hands and it was nothing to be worried about. I waited for 10 agonizing minutes of uncertainty as he sutured the area and swabbed it down again with betadine. When he finished, I sat up and looked at what he had set in the tray. It was a greyish mass that was about the size of a misshapen marble. Through the antiseptic scent of the hospital, I smelled something like spoiled meat. I felt my stomach turn as the realization that this had been inside me and had just begun to rot. One end terminated in what looked like a fingernail that had broke through my skin. It wasn't until he asked me if I knew what the term fetus in fetu meant that I connected all the macabre pieces of the jigsaw. Fetus in fetu, a parasitic twin. We went into the examination room where the doctor explained what he thought was happening as he gave me a complete look-over. He posited that I had started off with a twin, but somewhere along the way I had absorbed my twin into my body. It had likely siphoned off nutrients, which explained my lethargic activity and smaller stature when I was younger. He assumed that the mass had been reabsorbed by my body over the years and there was likely nothing left except that small piece we had just removed. However, as he palpated my back and his face turned cold, I knew that that was not what had happened. The doctor said he felt something just above my right kidney and that exploratory surgery was necessary. He told me that the sooner they performed the procedure, the better. I agreed, and he asserted that I would need to be completely anesthetized for the operation. It was then that I was forced to accept my worst fear. I would have to be sedated like my mother was. I tried to talk my way out of the situation, but my doctor explained that this was a life-threatening issue that needed to be resolved. I eventually relented and consented to the surgery. I spent a sleepless night in the hospital with my stomach growling at me the entire time. I prayed it was my stomach growling at not having eaten all day, rather than the partially formed fetus of my twin inside me. The anesthetist arrived about an hour after I woke up and talked me through the process step by step. She put the needle in my arm and connected it to an IV bag. She asked me if I was ready, and I nodded, terrified about what was happening and horrified about my prognosis. She told me everything was going to be all right and then hung the IV bag filled with saline, Ativan and an anesthetic. My last coherent memory before going under was of my mother and her final moments. What happened next was the worst 5 hours of my life. I remember hearing music in my daze. At first I thought the surgery was over until I heard the surgeon talking over the music, asking for a retractor to hold the surgical area open. I had two horrifying thoughts in that moment. The first being that Nicki Minaj's Anaconda was one of the most discomforting songs to hear playing in an operating room. The second was that I was going to be conscious for the entire surgery. They had taped my eyelids so I couldn't see anything, but I heard everything. As I laid there, unable to move during the gruff chorus of "X Gon Give It To Ya" by DMX. The head surgeon asked if what he was seeing was really what made up the mass. I heard one of the assisting nurses gag as he set the excised material into a pan. She excused herself, and someone joked that she wasn't good when situations got hairy. The people around him groaned at the pun that I wouldn't understand until they showed me what they extracted. I was in surgery for 5 hours, conscious and paralyzed for the entire experience. Luckily, I felt nothing, but I heard every joke, jab, and bit of gossip. I heard the sizzle as the bovie I looked the name up later cut and cauterized the incisions. Those 300 minutes were the most excruciating moments of my life. It felt like I was on that table for an eternity listening to music, puns, and the sound of my own operation. The worst part of it was the realization that I couldn't see what they were doing, and I had to imagine what was happening to me. My faculties returned a while after surgery. I didn't say anything to the attending nurse. I wanted to believe that what had happened hadn't actually occurred. The nurse was hesitant to show me what they removed, but I explained that I needed the closure. She told me the surgeon would show me when he gave me an update. I waited for 30 minutes, imagining the horror that they had removed from me before he arrived. He took me to a back room where he showed me the mass floating in formaldehyde. It was the size of a baseball and covered with hair, tiny teeth, and graying flesh. It looked like something pulled straight from John Carpenter's The Thing. He told me the surgery had been a success and they had removed most of the growth. He reassured me when he noticed my concern by explaining that a small mass had fused to my spinal column in utero and that it would be dangerous to attempt to remove it. He explained that my body had walled it off and encapsulated it and there was no danger. To attempt to remove it could have left me paralyzed from the waist down. I thanked him and recuperated in the hospital for a few days until I was able to go home. As soon as I got home, I looked into the mirror. There was a small line of stitches on my stomach and a divot on my back, where they had removed my parasitic twin. I just wanted to put everything behind me and forget about what I had growing and rotting inside me. I wanted to forget about what I remembered from the surgery. I failed on both of those fronts. I spent the next month in a chemical daze. The doctors prescribed me OxyContin for the pain. At first, I was hesitant to take it given my history, but the pain soon forced my hand. To be honest, it was pleasant. It felt like a ball of warmth at the center of my core that spread throughout my body 30 minutes after I took a dose. Those 4 weeks drifted by as a fuzzy and warm memory without anything interesting happening. It was so pleasant that I even pestered the doctor for another regimen of OxyContin under the pretense of pain. It was about 2 weeks after I finished the bottle that odd things began to happen. At first, I assumed my increased appetite was just me getting back to a normal diet after surgery and a month of opioids suppressing my hunger. However, I was eating more than usual. Usually, I would cook myself something to eat and sit down with a book. As I got lost in the book, I would eat. Sometimes I would finish a couple of chapters before I realized that I had eaten multiple plates of food. I didn't think anything of it. I just assumed that the excised mass had cleared up some space in my stomach. The stomach pains were harder to explain away. I eventually broke down after the pain continued and went to see the doctor. He felt the area and we talked for a while before he explained that it was likely a side effect of repeated opioid usage. He said it was common for prolonged usage to cause feelings of nausea, discomfort, and sometimes even anhedonia. He looked at me in a way that implied I was going to ask for another prescription. I wasn't, to be honest, but the implication was enough to keep me from pressing the issue. I agreed with his explanation and left without discussing my discomfort any further. The discomfort continued for a few weeks before the breaking point. I woke up in the middle of the night screaming in agony. There was a sharp pain in my side, and in my confusion I came to a sleep-addled conclusion. I had been stabbed. I looked frantically around my room for any sign of an intruder, but there was nothing. I made my way to the bathroom to look at the area. I wished that I had been stabbed. Instead, there was a quarter-sized chunk of skin missing from my back. I had been bitten. There was no mistaking the wound for anything else. I could see the area where teeth had scraped and cut into my skin as if it had been pinched and torn into a ragged hole from the inside. I tried to block out the memory of what the mass that was removed from me looked like. It was an amalgamation of hair, greying flesh and teeth. I won't lie, I had a complete mental breakdown when I connected all of the dots. I curled up in the fetal position and began to weep uncontrollably. It was too much. A recurring thought bounced around in my head like butterflies in the stomach. Why me? I started to have a panic attack on the cold tile of the floor. Why me? I began hyperventilating and couldn't catch my breath. Why me? I think I went crazy at that point because the next thing I heard was, "It's okay, we're going to be okay." I looked around, half expecting someone to be in the bathroom with me, but no one was there. It wasn't until the voice repeated those words that I realized where it was coming from. It was coming from the hole in my back. Whatever was inside me was talking to me. I got up. I had to go to the hospital. I was having a psychotic episode and likely suffering from another mass. As I headed towards the door, it spoke again, its voice no louder than the wheezing of a respirator. "Don't go. They hurt me." I don't know why I responded. If I had to guess, I would blame it on the ridiculousness of the situation and my complete mental breakdown moments earlier. Something was growing inside me like a creature from Alien that could talk. I should have sprinted to the nearest hospital screaming, but instead I spoke in a shaky, uncertain voice. "I have to, you're hurting me. If I don't, you might even kill me. What if I didn't? I can shift while I grow. I can make it so it doesn't hurt until I'm ready, and then we can work together to make it as painless as possible so we both can live." Ready for what? Until I'm strong enough to leave your body. Right now, I'm not strong enough to survive outside you. I just need you to sustain me for a few months. Please. They'll kill me at the hospital. Brother, I can be your friend. I want to be with you. I don't want you to be lonely. Please don't kill me. To be completely truthful, I don't know what made me agree. I can only try to explain my mindset at the time. I had just had the worst experience of my life in a surgery room. If I had it my way, I would never return to a hospital ever again. I didn't want another repeat of what happened to me the first time occurring again. I also didn't want to relive the memories of my mother's glassy stare as I held her hand and waited for her to die. The thing growing inside me had promised it wouldn't hurt me. I don't know, but listening to that quiet tone was reassuring. It spoke in a way that reminded me of dogs whimpering and babies crying. The voice sounded weak and scared. I promised that I wouldn't go to the doctors. I think those reasons were what made me agree to the stupidest decision I've ever made in my life. The first few days were the most awkward moments I have ever experienced in my life. Every now and then, I would feel it shifting inside me and apologizing when it moved in a way that brought me discomfort. It explained that the surgery had only mangled it. It would need some time to heal and regrow as it was still in the fetal stage and could produce fetal stem cells to regenerate. It held up its promise, and the pain I had been experiencing for weeks went away. A large part of me was still driven to go to the doctor and have my parasitic twin removed. I think the only thing preventing me from doing that was how frightened the voice sounded, and the realization that I would be murdering a living, breathing person. It wasn't until dinner one night that I felt any real sense of connection with it. I had just sat down to have a cheap microwave dinner when the voice spoke. "What are you doing?" I was taken aback, as it had previously only spoken when it was apologizing for shifting. I responded that I was eating and reading a short story. "We can remember it for you wholesale from an anthology." He asked me to read the story to him, and I did. I would read a paragraph to him in between each bite of food. When I finished both the meal and the story, he asked if I could read him another story. We spent the entire night reading and discussing various stories. As I enjoy multiple genres, I read a wide range of stories to the voice as it quietly listened. It wasn't until the sun crept in through the blinds that I realized how much time had passed. I had lost track of the time while talking to my twin. We had read dozens of short stories and spent hours talking about the ones we liked best. I went to bed after I promised my companion that we would continue this later. It became a daily fixture of our lives. Sometimes the voice would talk to me as I did chores or cooked a meal. I would always sit down for the meal with a book, and I would read aloud while I ate. Sometimes I would have to stop and explain an event to them, but most times they just listened quietly and waited patiently. Afterwards, we would discuss our feelings on the book or what we thought was going to happen. A sad part of me realized that this was the closest thing I had to a friend in almost a decade. I found myself looking forward to the discussions we would have after each meal. One night, a few weeks after their discovery, I heard the voice talking to me. I can only assume that it thought I was sleeping when it spoke those words. I had been asleep until I felt them shift inside me. What had once unnerved me now reminded me of a baby turning in their mother's womb. The voice twisted in my stomach and began talking. Soon I'll be with you. Soon I'll be able to touch you with my own hand. Soon you'll love me. I was so lonely all these years. No one to talk to. I experienced the world through you. Now I want to experience the world with you. I want to feel the sun on my skin and the wind in my hair. I want to be by your side. I kept those words to myself. A sad part of me realized that I now wanted the same thing. I wanted to be able to look at them while we talked. I wanted to take them outside and show them the world. I wanted a friend. Those words filled me with a warmth similar to OxyContin and made me realize how lonely and depressed I had actually been up to that point. I had no one I could talk to, no one I could relate to. Now I had a friend. Those words were lies, subterfuge to convince me that it actually cared about me and make me suffer through the growing pains. The veneer of fraternity and friendship sloughed off to reveal the decay underneath. I woke up early one morning to find that the owner of the voice had gone still inside me. It was asleep. I quietly made the veneer of fraternity and friendship sloughed off to reveal the decay underneath. I woke up early one morning to find that the owner of the voice had gone still inside me. It was asleep. I quietly made my way into the bathroom to do my morning duties when a macabre whim drove me to look at my back. The small hole in my back had almost quadrupled in size since it first spoke to me. I had treated and disinfected the fistula in the hopes that I could slide them out of the canal when they were strong enough to survive outside me. Through the fistula, I caught my first glimpse of my twin as it slept inside me. It is not my twin. It's not even human. It has multiple eyes on its face that look more like a fly than a human. It is still in the process of development, and in the 30 or so holes that pocked its face, only a dozen were filled with actual eyes. Its skin is cracked, mottled, and grey like maggoty pork, with tiny hair-like cilia breaking through its body. The thing's mouth looks like a lamprey eel, a concentric circle of needle-sharp teeth with a grotesque sucking appendage in the center. I stared in horror for a few minutes before I realized that it was starting to stir. I moved away from the mirror and did my business before it could fully wake up. I left the bathroom knowing that this thing was not to be trusted. It had grown faster than any organism should. In a few weeks, it went from the size of a softball to the size of a watermelon. It has swollen like a cancer inside of me, and only now do I realize how thin I've actually become due to its siphoning off my nutrients. I don't know where I contracted this thing. It isn't an absorbed fetal twin. It is a parasitic entity growing within me, looking to be birthed into this world so it can infect others and perpetuate the cycle. It'll find the weak-willed, the weary, the wretched, and it will take advantage of them. It'll promise them false friendship and hollow hope as it incubates inside them. It is not human, it is nightmare incarnate. How else could it regrow so quickly after being torn out of me by doctors? The growth they removed was a bud likely ejected to seed another part of my body. I can now feel dozens of other lumps on my arms, legs, and groin. Embryos in development. I am a hive. Now its every movement sends waves of agony through me. It is strong enough to survive on its own, and it doesn't need its wretched host anymore. I try to hide the pain for fear that it'll realize how much of an advantage it actually has now. I know that the time of parturition is soon upon us, and there is only one choice left. It will likely kill me on its way out to prevent me from trying to stop it. It is too late to go to the hospital. I am beyond help. The creature will realize what I am trying to do and stop me. It will either twist and constrict my spine, leaving me as a paralyzed nest for it, or simply debilitate me with pain until I can't move. Both are less than pleasant options. Even if I could make it to the hospital to remove them, what's to stop the host from casting off more migrating buds to grow into those fiendish things? It wants out, and I can't allow that. I have my own option. The thing likely won't see it coming until it is too late. On to why I'm writing this. I always wanted to write. I spent so much of my life reading that this seems like a logical progression. I don't know if that's irony or if it's just the fumes from the gasoline I poured around the house that have now soaked into the rug, coated the walls and furniture, getting to me, but it seems comical that the only piece I write is basically my suicide note. I have to share this story before I strike the match. I can feel it stirring inside me as the fumes permeate the house, unaware of what I'm planning. This thing, it breathes, it bleeds, it breeds. And soon it'll burn. We'll burn. I know what will happen when the end comes and it tries to break free and wriggle out of my shredded body. I'll hold it to me in my final moments. It will likely snap my spinal cord like a dead branch and paralyze me from the waist down. My legs won't matter though, as I have no intent on escaping. It'll scream, seethe and shriek as the flames crackle and snarl around us. I will look into its horrifying visage and I will smile. Even if its maliciousness made flesh, it is still my only friend left in this world. As the flames lap at us, I'll press it against me and whisper platitudes into its malformed ear. I'll tell it about how lonely I had been since my mother died. I'll tell it how glad I was to finally have a true friend that understood me. As we burn together, I'll tell them how much I love them. Story 2. I thought nothing could scare me, and then I went to Crow House. I was doing another stint in jail when I first heard about the house. My cellmate told me all about how he wanted to break into it as soon as he got out. That might sound a little weird, but Tommy said he had his reasons and I didn't care enough to pry. In hindsight, I should have cared a lot more. At lights out, Tommy told me so many strange stories about Old Man Crowther and the house he had built by hand. But I only half listened as I focused more on getting to sleep. I used to make Tommy so mad by having a good night's sleep. He'd say something like, "Man, that story about the moving shadows didn't scare you?" Nope, it did not. None of them did, mainly because I knew they were just stories kids told other kids. Nothing like that was going to be as scary as my first purse snatch. or the drug deal I negotiated with the triads, or the dozen other times I faced the barrel of a gun. But that fearless attitude tripped me up bad after I got out of jail myself. Tommy showed up one day with another dude who was roughly twice my size, yet Tommy introduced me as the man with no fear. So, of course, I couldn't back down from what I thought was a heist of the Crow House. Tommy wasn't leaving anything to chance. He sent me to City Hall. I was going to get the blueprints Crowther had to have submitted when he got his permit to build all those years ago. I zoned out while I drove. Must have, because I remember driving and then I was there. The receptionist told me that the permits and building department was just 2 rights and a left down a hallway, she pointed out. 2 rights and then a left. I repeated it as a mantra and found the office I needed. Soon enough, I had the blueprints in hand. I looked over them briefly, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. The Crow House was built like a maze. I wasn't worried. I knew how to get around a maze. I'd just touch a right-hand wall and eventually make it out. Boring and inefficient, but it'll work out in the end. Story of my life. So I left repeating a new mantra. A right and then 2 lefts. A right and then 2 lefts. But after that second left, I found myself turning to a bookcase-covered dead end. Confused, I went back and then to what I had thought was the first left. After a while, I found myself back at the door to the permits and building department. I opened it for help, but a new hallway greeted me. It ended with a T intersection, but there was some red graffiti painted on the marble wall. It said in my handwriting, "Don't go left, it just loops around." Suddenly I jolted awake. I was laying on the ground in front of a T intersection with that same red graffiti. Memories flooded my mind as I remembered getting back from City Hall, planning with Tommy, driving up to this cursed house and entering it. A day ago. Sorry for the theatrics, but I needed you to understand what this house does to people. It's not just a confusing layout, it actively tries to mess with you. I thought it was some gas leak disorienting us at first, but the things I've seen and felt and killed, they couldn't all be figments of my imagination. For a while we stayed focused and even quickly found Crowther in the living room. Looked like he had been dead for several months, just rotting in a chair in front of his television. We prodded his skeletal remains and their presence actually emboldened us to take our time exploring the nearby rooms. There wasn't much worth stealing. We knew that coming in, to only expected the money that Tommy was giving us. Regardless of what we found, he had already paid us $300 each and would pay us another $500 after the job. 4 girls had gone missing when Tommy had lived on this block. He was obsessed with proving that Crowther was behind the disappearances. I regret taking it, but it seemed like easy money at the time. We ended up leaving the blueprints in the living room because it seemed to be mistaken at every turn. The house seemed normal, so we didn't mind splitting up. I know, dumb move. But the sun was shining bright, and we were 3 dudes convinced we were the scariest thing in that house. Tommy took the dude, who called himself Thor, and they headed down to the basement since that's where he was most likely to find the remains of a murder sex dungeon. I went straight to the upstairs and quickly searched the bedrooms, but found nothing. The upstairs hallway was dark. The attic stairs came down easily enough, but I found no windows up there, which made the darkness stifling. It seemed to swallow the dim beam that came out of my flashlight. Because the light couldn't reach the walls, I felt like I was wandering around an infinite void. To tell the truth, I liked the feeling. It was otherworldly, and I felt like my imagination was inspired for the first time in a long time. But this must have given whatever influenced us an opening. I turned around expecting to see a softly glowing square showing how I could get down. Instead, I saw nothing but darkness. I panicked for the first time then, running towards where I thought the door would be. Instead, my body fell through the floor with a tremendous crash. My fall was broken by a bed below, which wasn't as lucky as it sounds since my ankles painfully smacked the wooden footboard. I laid expected the house to come alive with angry yells about what a moron I was. Instead, it remained silent outside. After I confirmed neither ankle was broken, I left the room and found myself in the upstairs hallway, still with the attic stairs pulled down, but it now seemed twice as long and accommodated twice the rooms. I went straight for the stairs, but walking down them just led me to another hallway full of rooms. I wandered around and opened doors, but only found more hallways behind them. Turning around showed a similar sight of more rooms where the stairs used to be. At first, I thought my fall had messed me up more than I thought. But no matter how far I walked or how much I rested, nothing got better. I didn't understand it. I didn't need to. I just went into survival mode and forced myself to stay calm. I touched the right-hand wall of the next hallway I entered and walked as fast as my sore ankles would handle. I ignored the flickering lights. I didn't turn to see what was going on with the shadows in the corner of my eyes. I wasn't going to be distracted from my goal of getting out of this place. I called out for help at regular intervals, but never heard from the rest of my crew. Instead, I eventually found myself looping back around and out to the first hallway. That's the problem with the right-hand trick. It doesn't work if you start with a disjointed wall. That's when I started tagging the environment with the spray paint I carried. We had intended on spray painting murderer over the front door as we left, but all those plans were dead to me. I thought I made some progress, but this was a large maze, so I ended up eating the few snacks I carried and taking a nap. That nap led to the crazy realistic dream I had. Since the graffiti warned against going left, I went right. A right and then two lefts. I had found myself repeating the mantra from my dream. With nothing left to lose, I followed it, and the second left led to a new room. The kitchen. I ran over to the fridge and opened it wide. Yeah, that wasn't my brightest move. To be fair, I was starving. I wasn't thinking of how everything in there would be spoiled if the owner had been dead for half a year. Worse, there was way more meat than there should have been. Just plate after plate filled with rotting meat. I recoiled from the sight and smell of it all, but that's when I saw them. Two large pit bulls had just walked into the kitchen and were already starting to bare their teeth at the sight of me. I still wasn't scared. These were flesh and blood enemies, things I could hurt. I thought I'd take that any day over head games. I pulled out my revolver, but the sudden motion caused them to charge. In my haste to react, I fired wide, and then I had both of them on top of me. I fell to the ground and sacrificed my right arm, using it to shield my face while I pressed the revolver against the nearest one's rib cage and fired again and again. I saw the pantry door open and Tommy peeked out. I screamed at him to help, but he asked, "Me? Are you talking to me?" Even with one of my arms being torn to shreds, I could have strangled him. I put the revolver against the head of the dog that was still ripping and tearing the flesh and muscle from me. The pain was unimaginable. I fired once and the bullet entered just behind one eye and exited out the other, grazing my elbow. But it didn't stop eating me. I fired again and again. Half of its skull was gone, but the jaws seemed to work just fine regardless. The next time I pulled the trigger, my gun just impotently clicked. I started hitting the dog with the handle when Tommy called out, still from the pantry, "Are you done yet?" Furious, I yelled back, "It won't die! Help me!" Tommy opened the door, walked right up to me, bent down and asked, "What won't die?" I stared at him, then looked back to the dog. It wasn't there. The other dog was no longer weighing me down either. I stood up and examined my mostly uninjured arm. The bullet graze was the only damage. I started to explain to Tommy, but he shook his head and said, "It's this house, man. It's been nothing but insanity since Thor and I entered the basement." Tommy started to tell me where Thor was and what was left of him, but I stopped him. I told him that it didn't matter right now, we just needed to focus on getting out. He tried to tell me, "No, you don't understand, we found the girls, man. We found them." As dispassionately as I could, I told him, "No, don't tell me what happened because it's only what you think happened. When we get out of here, Thor could be alive, and it could turn out the girls were never here. Whatever you hear, see, or smell does not matter. I thought those dogs were real, and I wasted all my rounds. We're going to get through this by being smart and careful from here on." I didn't tell Tommy that I was only half sure that he was real. It wouldn't have helped anything. Either way, I was happy to have someone else around. We were just as lost, but the company helped. The kitchen door opened to a library with a long mirrored wall on one side. I ignored it and instructed Tommy to do the same, even though when we had come in, I thought I saw our reflections doing everything we did, but with the wrong hand. I was steadfast in my desire to not let the house fool me again. I knew the tropes. I had seen hundreds of horror movies. Maybe this was just gas, maybe ghosts, but I had figured that whatever was going on, we could only be hurt by ourselves. Which meant that if I just my head down and stepped carefully, we'd make it out eventually. And then we reached the dark room, seemingly randomly. We just opened a closet door and I found that eerie black void again. Somehow I found this comforting since it was one of the first oddities I'd noticed about the house. Maybe it would be one of the last, but we had to get through it either way. Tommy and I, such tough, strong ex-cons we were, started to hold hands. It was dark enough that I could never see all of Tommy at one time. I swept my flashlight over him several times in that dark room, just to make sure it was his hand I was holding. Then my light briefly illuminated the movement behind Tommy. I didn't explain, I just pulled him along faster. But while I looked behind, something caught Tommy's eye from the front and he yelled at me to look out. I snapped my head forward and saw that our light was finally reaching a wall. We had found the end of the attic. I was fully prepared to knock down a wall and drop 2 or 3 stories to the ground to get out of there, but Tommy pointed up. My light followed the direction his finger pointed, but it struggled with the darkness in the air. Still, I could make out that something was hiding in the corner of the attic. The upper corner, where the walls met the ceiling. Something big. It started to walk down the wall. The details were hard to make, but I counted 8 legs. That's all I needed to know. I pulled the crowbar out of my bag and started attacking the wall with all my might. I slid the metal in between wooden planks and pulled them out slowly. Tommy tried to warn me that the spider was closer. I looked up and could see that it had appeared to grow more, smaller, legs, but it was only a little closer. Shaking my head, I just told Tommy to quit worrying and help me get out of here. He asked me, "Man, does anything scare you?" I just grunted in reply, but felt like the house had thrown me a softball. I've never had a problem with spiders before. I get not liking something small crawling all over you, but making it a giant spider removed any fears I might have had. And then the next strike against the wall produced a thick stream of sunlight. I tore into it greedily right as the thing above fell, right next to Tommy. I turned around to tell him not to worry, that the spider wasn't real, but all the words left me. Standing behind us were 4 girls. They were all pretty, wearing white nightgowns, and seemed to have their heads fused at the scalp. They were permanently in a crab position, with their backs towards the floor and only their feet touching the ground. Their arms flopped around as they moved in sync towards Tommy. All 4 girls were sobbing. I didn't wait to see what else they could do. I was terrified. I launched myself at the small hole I'd made and squeezed myself out of that house like I was the last bit of toothpaste from a tube. After I popped out, a spray of blood followed. Quarts of the stuff. I tumbled on the roof, and my vision was disoriented from the rapidly changing direction of my head, the blood in my eyes, and the bright light that seemed to blind me even when my eyes were closed. It didn't matter. I couldn't stop myself if I tried. I fell from roof to eaves to another lower roof, and then again until it felt like I was falling down a flight of stairs. Until I hit the bottom and realized that I had been falling down a flight of stairs. I was still inside the house. My despair was short-lived, since I also realized I was next to the living room. I crossed it to get to the front door. I only slowed to pause before Mr. Crowther's corpse. I didn't know what he did, how much of this insanity was because of the house, him, or whatever. But I still wished I had bullets in my gun because I loved to drill him in between the eyes. That's when his grey, paper-thin eyelids opened and he stared at me with completely white eyes. That scared me pretty good too. I grabbed the nearest thing to me and ended up breaking his left forearm and shoving the arm bones into his left eye. I pushed it in hard, trying to hit my brain. Instead, there was a squeal of pain that sounded like it came from within the head, and green blood, for lack of a better word, squirted out behind the ocular fluid. Whether or not that meant he would truly die, I left him still writhing in that chair. I needed to get out. It was almost welcoming to burst open the front door and see a sea of red and blue lights. I found out later that my gunfire resulted in the neighbors calling. I didn't mind. I needed the company. Even as they threw me to the ground and handcuffed me, I was happy. At least until I got paranoid about this all just being another hallucination of the house's design. Now, there's a lot that scares me. Spiders and things that look like spiders scare me. Going to sleep and waking up scares me. Stairs scare me, but I get to stay locked up where it's nice and mostly safe for a long time. They have no idea how I twisted Thor into the pretzel they found, and they never found Tommy's body. So the death penalty is out. Still, it didn't look too good to have all of Tommy's blood covering me. They kept me in solitary because I kept splitting my cellmate's head open to check for little men who might have green blood. Just in case, but at least my insanity defense looks to be strong. I'm hoping I can get transferred to a more comfortable hospital soon. In the meantime, I just have to be on the lookout for any logical inconsistencies. The house isn't going to trap me again so easily. If I'm still in there, I need to find out as soon as possible to escape. Wait, it's not helpful to think like that. I must remember I'm safe. Of course I'm out. It's been weeks since I was in the house. I think it's been that long anyway. It's really hard to keep track of time all alone in here. Oh, sorry, I'm not thinking clearly. I can just check the calendar on this laptop. But this laptop? How did I get a laptop in solitary confinement? Wait, where am I? Where am I? I thought nothing could scare me. Update. I'm still trapped in the house. I cleaned up my act a lot. My memory's still fuzzy on how I got a hold of a contraband laptop, but the guards took it away as soon as I made all that fuss. Anyway, I got a great public defender who was able to save me from the murder charges and even the B&E of the old Crow House. He truthfully argued that we were in there because of a reasonable suspicion of foul play, and we had rightfully searched the place for survivors after finding Mr. Crowther dead in the living room. It helped that none of the prosecutor's experts could agree as to how exactly Thor died, and they never found Tommy's body. I was still convicted of the assaults after I had been imprisoned, but I took a plea deal and just got 5 years probation, the majority of which I would spend at Oregon State Hospital. Of course, nice as my lawyer was, I never fully trusted him. I had made a sort of peace with the thought that I might have still been trapped in the Crow House. Its illusions and spectres looked, felt, and even smelled real. I can still remember the pain of feeling a dog ripping the flesh off of my arm. So it took a good year before I felt like I could relax. You can only be paranoid for so long. Then you just get tired of all the fear. I decided that if I was in a hallucination, I would just wait and see where it all went. And truthfully, I figured that if the house could create illusions this good, then I was a dead man no matter what I did. Either way, I managed to make life work at the hospital for long enough. Eventually, my memories of the house faded so I could start to sleep naturally again. I made lots of progress with my therapist about issues that plagued me before the Crow House, and I eventually got a clean bill of health. From the hospital, I got a job as a librarian of all things. I'm heavily tatted, but none on my neck or face, so I go to work in a long-sleeve sweater with white gloves. I've always considered myself an intelligent brute, but after a haircut and shave, I looked like I belonged here. I didn't completely let the Crow House slip from my mind, though. I used my position to study up on that location and found some pretty interesting stuff. Police reports and newspaper articles revealed that the land the Crow House was built on had been terrorizing people long before Mr. Crowther owned it. Probably the most interesting of which was an incident with the people who owned the land before Mr. Crowther. Only the husband made it out of a house fire that he freely admitted to setting himself. He had a wild tale about moving across the country for his job, only to find his new office was a maze of cubicles that he couldn't get out of. According to him, half of his new co-workers were out to kill him, while the others seemed just as scared and lost as him. He said he must have wandered those grey walls for days without ever finding an exit. Instead, he finally managed to find a lighter and set the nearest cubicle ablaze. Of course, he was only trying to get firefighters to come to the rescue, but it was only when the fire had spread too far to stop that he suddenly realized he was standing outside his own home. The rest of his family had been asleep and unable to escape. 3 days after his arrest, he had hung himself in jail, just like I almost did. The fire cleared the way for Mr. Crowther to buy the land and build the monstrosity of a house that I had been trapped in, while they didn't have as much trouble as I did. It still took the police weeks before they officially cleared the house of the 4 bodies. Oh yeah, that's also why I managed to get off so light. Besides Thor and Mr. Crowther's body, they also came across the bodies of a couple in the basement. They had both died of heart attacks and were found sitting in a corner, holding each other tight. The couple had died long before Mr. Crowther, and it helped paint him in a bad light, even though there wasn't enough evidence to definitively say what had happened to them. All this news made me feel simultaneously more and less sane. I wasn't the problem going into the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was forever corrupted by it, even if I did escape. You might be wondering why, if I suspected I was still in the house, I would trust anything I was reading. Well, I had never read anything like this before. I figured that when I was speaking to someone, if I was still in the house, then it was like I was speaking to the house. Same with reading. The information had to come from somewhere. True, it could have been the house messing with me, but I thought it was more likely that it would brag about itself. All of it got pushed to the side when I met Sandy. Every day she would bring her kid in for my library's Storytime hour. I finally got the nerve to just talk to her. Not only did I think she was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen, but I was worried that she was the trap that the house was building to. I was lonely enough, though, that I just went for it. Illusion or not, she was beautiful. And, as it turned out, very single. We started dating and suddenly the world got a lot brighter. It felt more real, too. I got to know her son Mason, and he seemed to like me. So you know where this is all going. First, life got great. Then, Sandy and I married. I won Oregon's Librarian of the Year. I found out Sandy was pregnant with a girl. My life was now perfect. Too perfect. I had never forgotten about the Crow House. It was always there in the back of my mind. When I got angry at Sandy and maybe took it a bit too far, she always forgave me. Too easily. Mason was too good a kid. My work is too easy for too much money. I tried to ignore the feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it was easy at first. I guess I didn't want Sandy to be fictional. But then a new book, to me, was returned to the library. A history of a tribe that had split from Modoc Native Americans that used to live around here. I started reading it to figure out which shelf it needed to be returned to. Just after the first page were two maps of where this tribe used to live. One was what the land looked like at the time they occupied the area. The other was the same image, but with a current map overlaid on top of it. This second map clearly showed me the Crow House right next to the tribe's main camp. After seeing that, whether or not I was still in the house, I felt like this book was a message for me. So I kept reading. The tribe called themselves the Deniga-Maclax, which roughly translated to the sun-setting people. They were a sort of cult that had been ostracized from the larger tribe for their beliefs. They thought the world was going to end soon. However, their leader had once come upon a cave with long, twisting passages, and this man had an epiphany on how to save the world, at least temporarily. He immediately started making sacrifices for the young women in his tribe, and when the world didn't end, his efforts were declared a huge success. He didn't just kill the girls, though. They were drugged and then carried deep into the cave with plenty of food and water. When she awoke, the girl would be free to try and find her way back. However, the author of the book theorized the whole maze was rigged, maybe with a stone that covered the entrance. Nowhere could they find any evidence that anyone survived this exceedingly slow execution. Plus, the tribe wouldn't have wanted a survivor. The whole point was for the young woman to have hope, but ultimately fail. For her to constantly pray for God's guidance and for those prayers to get increasingly more heartfelt and desperate as time went on. They tried to wring every last drop of devotion out of their sacrifices, and it worked, or at least appeared to. They figured the gods wouldn't want to destroy the world as long as it could still produce praise this pure. Either way, using the death maze got so popular that they eventually had to kidnap young women from other tribes and then use people of all ages and genders to keep a steady flow of wretched prayers coming. This led to a war with the larger tribes, and the Deniga-Maclax were finally wiped out. Their conquerors feared the cave, though. They thought it was haunted by hundreds of lost souls who were still trying to find their way out. So they filled in the entrance and stayed far away. At this point, it came as no surprise that the location of the cave was exactly under the Crow House. The book did have one last shock for me, though. Immediately after finishing it, I looked at the author to see if I could maybe find them later. The book was written by William Crowther. There was no author photo, but it couldn't have been a coincidence. I practically threw the book away from me. The house was taunting me. Somehow it had delivered the book to me. The easiest explanation was simply that I was still in the house. I tried to reject that idea once more. I left work immediately and drove home. Sandy was on the phone with my confused boss when I got there, but she was already telling him that I wasn't feeling well. I just went to our bedroom and flopped on the bed to try and think things through. Soon Sandy joined me and asked what happened. I had never talked to her about my stay in the mental hospital or what happened at the Crow House. She had known about all my other stints in prison, but that's it. So I finally told her. When it was over, Sandy looked scared. but she told me that I believed it happened. Then she said she had some good news. My boss had told her that it was clear I was having some trouble at work today, so I should go ahead and take tomorrow off too, so we could have a 3-day weekend. Sandy started to say how we used that time to relax together, but I cut her off. I told her something along the lines of, "Don't you see how wrong that is? Bosses don't give you time off if you leave work, they fire you." We argued for a bit more, but I felt silly arguing with a house, because that's who I had to be talking to. The house was pretending to be my wife. I told her that I was onto her. She had trapped me before, but wasn't going to trick me anymore. The thing that called herself Sandy burst into tears. She told me that I was scared. She begged me to think of our unborn child, of Mason. I almost tore into her head then and there to see if there was anything alien about her biology. But the house had Mason burst into our room while I was wrestling Sandy to the ground. In the end, I couldn't go through with it. Real or not, I didn't want to see Sandy hurt. After getting up and all of us calming down, I promised I would get better. She gave me an ultimatum. Our child would be born in about a month, so she would stay with her mother during that time, and I had to use every resource I had to get better by then. Or else I wouldn't be allowed to be a part of this family anymore, or even see the baby, like it's mine. I just went along with her plan to get some peace. I tried to think of a way that I could escape, for real this time. I finally decided I would visit my father. We have a complicated relationship. The house wouldn't be able to accurately portray my father given how repressed my memories of him were. I showed up at his apartment with no warning. I knocked. He opened the door angrily but just stood there in shock for a moment. Then he started crying. He sobbed while telling me how sorry he was and how many regrets he had. This wasn't my father. My father couldn't go 5 minutes without hitting me. This was the house just trying to show me what I wanted again. I pushed him. He balled his hand up in a fist, and for a second I thought I saw the man who raised me again. Yet, this imposter just dropped his fist and tried to pull me in for a hug. He kept apologizing and asking for my forgiveness. He tried to tell me that he had changed a lot over the last 20 years. Probably because the house knew it wasn't fooling me. It had to come up with some excuse. I almost believed it. Almost. Instead, I knocked my old man to the ground and pulled a hammer from my waistband. I cracked open his head and searched for anything alien living inside. While I didn't find any, I wasn't sure how this worked. The only thing I was sure of was the bloody mess on the floor wasn't Dad. Not that it mattered to the police. After all, they were just the house too. So was the judge. That's why he was still lenient. He just put me back in the hospital again, this time for life. This house is good at mind games. It's not revealing the charade until it thinks I've let my guard down again. For whatever reason, it decided to let me have a laptop again. In the universe, they told me that communicating with others would help me with my delusions. Once again, I'm playing along. But only until Mike, the orderly, stops paying attention. Recounting everything that's happened has just been to keep my hands realistically moving over the keyboard. I know there's no one out there. It's taking forever, but Mike can just keep watching me typing merrily along. Eventually he'll take a break, and that's when I'll finally escape this house. I don't need long, just 5 minutes or so. Probably less than that, since I already used my spare sheets to make the noose last night. I'm escaping for real this time. Story 3. I wish it was my drunk roommates eating my food. This is my brother's girlfriend's story. She doesn't have a Reddit, but I told her about this subreddit, and she wanted to share her story because it's creepy. but also to learn from. I go to school in a big city that is one of the least safe cities in the US. I chose this school for nursing and not for the location. I live in a row house. That's what we call it. Off campus with 4 other girls. Cheaper and nicer than dorms, or so we thought. I guess you get what you pay for. We are all girls and sophomores in college. As you would guess, we go out and drink, come back, do things we don't remember. We had just started our rent in August. 3 floors, plus a basement which was padlocked by the owners. Understandable, we would have parties down there to avoid immediate cleanup. The house was a great, amazing location for the school and work. I am a CNA who works odd hours, important for later. It was not expensive and in good condition. I had never lived with that many people before. Just one roommate, so before we knew if one of us had misplaced or changed something, I started to notice my snacks were either half gone or completely gone. I was getting annoyed, but in a house of many people, it's too much work to go figure out who ate what, so I ignored it. Slowly, as girls do, we started making comments about someone eating our food, but passive-aggressively, yay, no college girls. We all just let it go, 'cause who wants a whole house fight? I work until about 11 in the NICU and get home at about 11:30, mostly on weeknights. I started to notice pans left out or snack wrappers around. I thought it was odd because none of my roommates had done that before, but just thought, oh, they probably drank a bottle of wine, then went to bed and forgot about all this. Again, my roommate started making comments. This time we started to ask because it was getting annoying, all our food being gone and things being left. I knew it was one of them, but who wants to admit they ate someone else's snacks in college? Snacks are a high commodity. We chalked it up to the girl who always smokes and eats her weight in food. She swore it wasn't her. This went on for about 2 months. It got more obvious. Someone was taking everyone's food. The girl that always smokes, I see her eat her whole snack pantry in a night. I wish it was her. One night at work, I was about to get off, but a situation happened and I didn't end up leaving until 12:30. I took the bus home. I carry pepper spray, a taser and a pocket knife, don't worry. I got home and was about to collapse. I wanted to go to bed ASAP. I walked in the front door and the stairs were directly in front of me. You can also see down the side of the kitchen. I walked in and saw someone in the kitchen but was way too tired to say hi, thinking it could end in a 30-minute conversation about nothing, so I went straight upstairs. When I got to the 2nd floor, I noticed all my roommates' doors were closed, which always means they are all either in their room for the night or asleep. I got a weird feeling, just something that made it click. They were all asleep, right? I texted our house group chat, asking if anyone was in the kitchen. I felt stupid for even asking. 2 responded no, and they said the other 2 had been asleep. I knew it wasn't any of my roommates down there at that moment. I dialed but didn't press call. I crept into my roommate's room across the hall. Thankfully, or maybe not thankfully, she didn't have her door locked. I whispered, telling her I think someone is in the house. She gave me the widest eyes ever and almost looked like she was going to cry. She didn't suspect anything like I had, but for reference, a very bad area, as in there was a shooting in the house 2 doors down only weeks earlier by an intruder. She mouthed to make the call. The whole time we were dead silent, we didn't hear anything at all. I was starting to think I was seeing things after such a long day at work and was regretting that I dialed thinking I was going to look like an idiot when they showed up and I was just overtired and dreaming. We explained what was going on and they said they would send someone ASAP, and that does mean right away since it is a big and dangerous city. The police showed up and I didn't even want to go downstairs, but the operator confirmed it was them, so I did. But the whole time I could swear the operator could hear my heart beating. The police come in and look around. I'm thinking, oh God, I look so dumb. They ask if there are any other floors. We tell them technically the basement, but it's padlocked, so really no. They checked the basement just in case, and well, yeah, they were right. A man had been living in the padlocked basement. The lock was pulled off the hinges and just kind of propped against the wall. We never looked at that, though. We rarely went out back. The guy had taken a comforter of one of my roommates out of the hall closet, had a mattress from God knows where, and his clothes. Well, he was the one moving and eating all of our stuff. He would come out in the middle of the night and do it. He started getting more comfortable. I don't know if he was drugged out and forgot to clean his tracks or if he didn't care. Me and my roommates have pretty consistent schedules during the week, probably letting him think that any time after about 12 was good to come out. We never slept with our doors locked, and that's what freaks me out most. He had access to any one of us at any moment, and we had no idea. When he was getting arrested, I was the only one to go down and look. I don't know why I did. I wish I didn't. I took a picture in the process of him being arrested to show my roommates who were too afraid to go down. This is him. So yeah, let's never actually meet, dude. Edit some questions about all the stuff he had down there. The clothes were unexplainable, and the nice button-down shirts you see are shirts from two of my roommates' boyfriends they complained about losing. The basement was also used as extra storage for the owners long ago, so that's why there's a pull-up bar and random bigger things. Not everyone has to believe it, but I do. It happened to me, and it was very scary. Edit for clarification on the pronouns changing from me to her. It's because I was with my brother's GF when posting this, and a little bit after, but once she left I started answering for her, asking her for the answers. I just didn't want to pretend to be her. In the comments I was saying what she told me when I asked. Sorry, should have made that clear because now people think it is fake. It happened, there is a picture there. I thought that would be enough to show it's true. Story 4. There is something in the woods. I had previously posted this story with my wife's account a couple of days ago in our Bigfoot. I didn't know what we had seen, and it wasn't until someone replied with, "Feel free to post on our backwoods creepy." This caught me off guard as I had never heard of Glimmerman Wendigo Crawler before. Now, I haven't read too much into this topic as I have a lot going on, but I soon realized that this ties in just about everything that has happened since we moved in a year ago. I'm going to start with the seemingly unrelated incidents that have led up to this most recent eye-opening experience. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest, and after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end, so please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and then looked up at me like, nope. So, I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off, walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around, but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of the hedges next to me that line the walkway to our front door rattle. At first I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later I heard the sound of a large rock about the size of a cantaloupe landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said whoever that this was is about to be shot. After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me nope back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned and drew my gun again, expecting something right there, but again there was nothing. A couple weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now, at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Growing up in Oregon, loved the rain, and for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day and then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching the rain. So, for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stopped me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, what did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children lying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now, at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I am getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there is some child out there lost in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil." She then says, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stood up and started walking toward the stairs. I jumped up, grabbed her hand again, and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies, and we both go inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously, and you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She then looks out into the woods and says, "See, there it is again." Again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim and that she needed to get back in the house. She said, "What if someone left a baby out there?" I said, "Well, if that were true, I would hear it too." Now at this point, I was starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out front on the porch. It was early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn that day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around in his little car in front of the house. Now he knows that he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside. But with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we are talking, we are both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said was, "How are things?" We said good, and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids who happens to be one of their teachers in school. And we said, "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over where our son was and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, as most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-sized basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers, grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area weren't making a peep. Now our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone, including me. So to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had flicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said, okay, as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time nothing is going on outside. There have also been times when we were sitting in the house, and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she said she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part of this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for a barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property next to the main road. It is kind of on a downslope, but it worked perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the down range, you have woods surrounding you except back up to my shop. I have to say it has always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day around 5 in the evening, I was sighting a new rifle scope. The sun was still up but was going to start to fade soon. So I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you have been in Tennessee woods, you will know that a lot of branches fall off of trees randomly out of nowhere, so this is nothing new. Except this time, it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around, facing the range, and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out, so running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backward up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this as I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store and about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer but a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had commented that it was almost as if it had known I could see its eyes and moved. The color was kind of golden, green, but they resembled the mannerisms of a large cat as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I have always been skeptical, as I had never seen anything with my own two eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now my street is kind of a spread-out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big moving quickly on all fours. Then when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open and moving as quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now, and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of her car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard for my command annoyed me, but still I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she is about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something grey and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings, grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks and leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying "Nope, nope, nope," over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that where the pupils were looked grey, like the way eyes look when they go blind. She said it was dark grey, and she swears she could see through it almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was tall and looked ominous as hell. The next morning we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height to around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think this thing was a Glimmerman crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. Now, I originally posted this on our Bigfoot, but after doing a bunch of research, I believe this belongs here. One of the things that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication. So when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs it had heard. My wife was hearing our son crying for help as he had recently fallen and cried for help. And the baby crying would be our newborn baby who she had given birth to recently, and it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped owned land, and on one of the trees there is this large old sign that says "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and is just pure forest for as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make us scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there is more than one of these things out there, this makes the missing make a whole lot of sense. I feel perplexed and scared as to what can I do. Any advice? I will try and keep this post alive with any new experiences. Edit, pic of sign. TLDR, a monster has been terrorizing my family for a year since we moved in. It has tried luring my wife and children into the woods, and I am asking for advice on what to do. Update 1. Thank you all for the support. We are overwhelmed with the number of responses that we have had. Unfortunately, we can't afford to get the camera system trail cameras that many have recommended. I am a disabled veteran and had just lost my business to the COVID lockdowns, and we are struggling to afford the basic amenities currently. That being said, I did go out soon after posting at night to try and get some evidence to bring here for you. Unfortunately, the camera on my phone is not great for nighttime and seems to make the images very grainy with low lighting. As I was sitting there that night, I did catch some strange sounds on camera. As well, when I passed an area with my flashlight, there appeared to be something, but when I came back to it, there was nothing. Again, due to the lighting, it is very hard to make out. I haven't felt comfortable going out since. My niece just came back from a week's vacation in Florida, so we plan to sit out there a couple of nights to try and see if we can get anything. This stuff has been happening for a while now, but it was random and far apart. Ever since this last incident, I have seen things that I can't explain, but they seem to be happening almost daily now. Last night when my niece arrived, we went out on the front porch to welcome her. I did notice something that looked like a face staring at me. But what was weird was that as I was staring at it, it moved back into the shadow without moving, if that makes any sense. These are the things I want to get on here for you. We had an interview for a podcast and plan to do a few more. We will post the links as we get them. There is a story of a man in Georgia who I believe saw the same thing I did that night, and I would like to post a link for you as well. We are also going to be working with an artist to try and get a good picture to show exactly what we saw that night. If anyone wants to donate, loan a better night camera, message me. I would like to keep everyone updated on the goings-on. There have been other things that have happened here that I haven't mentioned in this post that I also would like to add. I know that they may not be connected, but I feel that you all should be the judge of that. The one thing that I would like to add in this update that I hadn't thought was connected was about 2 to 3 weeks ago. My wife and I had been in an argument about something silly. She decided to walk back into our woods to clear her head. I was on the back patio when I noticed her walking down our shooting range. I asked her where she was going and she said to cool off. Now I know the chances of something happening to her was slim, but I found it odd that she would choose to go into the woods rather than simply walking down the road. I quickly got dressed and went down to try and bring her back. I went to the end of the range and called out her name. After a few minutes of calling out, I heard nothing, not a peep or a twig or anything. Now the weird part is that it is impossible to move around these woods without making any sound, especially for her. I was worried that she was walking too far, but I had to get back into the house as our children were alone. It freaked me out because it was as if she had vanished. I went back in the house and debated calling someone, but figured I would give her a little more time. I went to the back patio and waited. After about an hour, I started to get worried. I called out her name again and decided that I would call if she hadn't returned at an hour-and-a-half mark. After another 20 minutes went by, she came walking back out of the woods. Angry that she had worried me so much, yet also relieved, I asked her what she was thinking. She said, "What?" as she walked back up into the house. She came in and looked at me like I was crazy. I said, "Did you not hear me calling out to you?" She said she only heard me once, and she replied, "Now this is where it gets crazy." She said, "I have only been gone for 10 to 15 minutes. Why are you freaking out?" When I told her that she had been gone for an hour and 20 minutes, she didn't believe me. She also said that when she went down there, she didn't go very far, but when she turned around, she started walking and got worried that she was lost. She said she didn't recognize where she was, but something told her to keep walking. She said it felt strange and that the air felt different. When she came back out of the woods, she was relieved to see the house. Now, the part that upsets me the most about this was that where she said she was is impossible. I was standing 20 to 30 feet away from that spot. If she had been there, not only would I have seen her, but she could have talked to me in a normal voice. More concerning is that you can see the house from this spot, and how she felt lost is mind-boggling. I don't know what this was. I thought that again she was just losing her mind. After reading a lot of responses, I feel that what happened to her was real. I plan to go back to where she was with her to prove that you can see the house from there. But I want her to show me exactly where she went, as well as talk me through everything. I know some people have to think that we are crazy, but I promise that I will do whatever it takes to get proof and keep you all updated as we figure this out. I know this is turning into a book to read, but I want to be as detailed as possible. Let me know if you want me to keep posting the updates here like this, or if you just want me to make new posts. I will try to keep a weekly update for you all. This is the guy that I think saw exactly what we saw. We have heard random explosions that shook our house. I just figured we live in the redneck country. Update 2, June 24th, 2022. Weird things keep happening. Today, my 3-year-old son is playing on the back patio a few feet away from us, and all of a sudden, the dogs inside jump and start barking as one of our dogs, Duke, who's on the patio with him, comes bolting into the door. I jump up to see what's going on, and my son is pointing at the tree line saying, "Werewolf, Daddy, werewolf!" Now my son loves watching videos of werewolves for toddlers for some reason. I would normally put this off as nothing, but if you saw the look on his face, you would know that he was serious. Plus, with the way my dogs reacted, he had to have seen something. I pulled out my phone and began recording. He kept saying Daddy looked like a werewolf in the bushes. I tell him I can't see anything, but I can hear something really big in the leaves. I will post the recording of the ordeal to see if any of you can see anything that I might have missed. Update 3 July 9th, 2022. Okay, I meant to keep everyone updated up until now. I've just had a lot on my plate. My niece has quit. She said she can't handle all the stuff that has been happening to her. Everything was fine for a while. We kept indoors for the most part. We went out on the porch one night with a flashlight and camera hoping to catch something. We kept hearing things in the brush, which could be anything. After a while of not seeing anything, we went back inside. I said my prayers and then slept like a baby. My niece, however, did not. She woke up late the next day and seemed a bit jumpy. I asked her, "What's wrong?" She said that she didn't sleep well as something was outside her window. It took a bit of prodding to get her to talk about it. She said she could hear something big outside her window, but every time she looked, she couldn't see anything. She said she heard weird noises that she couldn't describe. She came out into the living room to see if I was still up, but I was fast asleep. She decided to go back to her room and go to sleep watching YouTube on her phone. She said she was almost asleep when she felt something standing right behind her. She turned around and there was nothing. She said she kept having the feeling but brushed it off as her imagination. That was until about 3 a.m. when she woke up. She said she had her phone in the windowsill playing a video. She had the same feeling as before, but this time it was very intense, like whatever it was, it wanted to devour her. She turned around quickly and saw what looked like a shadow disappear into the wall in the blink of an eye. She told me this kept happening until she passed out late in the morning. I told her that was weird, as we had never experienced anything like that in the house before. We have had strange things happen, like things disappear for a while, then reappear days or months later in the exact spot they last were. She said it felt like whatever this was, it made her feel like it wanted to hurt her. I told her to keep me updated and let me know if anything else happens. A few days later, she asks if she can use the hot tub that's out back. I explain that it's off as we can't afford to heat it. When we get over to it, I open it to look inside. To my disbelief, not only is it on, but the water looks great, minus a little cleanup that needed to be done. As I'm walking around, all of a sudden, I hear this really loud thump behind me, like a log falling onto the ground or a really big boulder hitting the ground. Imagine an engine block falling 20 feet onto soft soil. It made me jump. I turned around but couldn't see anything as the brush was too thick. I keep helping her work on the spa. Then she says she is going to go inside and get changed so she can get in. I look around and realize that it's getting dark outside, and I don't want to be out here. I bend over to work on getting the filter cleaned out, and I hear what sounds like something big snapping branches and charging at me. It made me jump and then run to the back door. I turned around to see what it was, and nothing. I walked back into the house and walk upstairs. I told her I heard something out there, and she looked at me for a minute. Then said, "Well, I want to get in and relax." She asks if I can leave the back patio door open so if she needs me, she can call. But, according to her, she enjoyed the spa without incident. Every day I notice her getting more anxious and less willing to talk about it. She says every night something new happens to her, but when I ask her to elaborate, she refuses. A few nights later, I walk out on the porch and notice it's dead quiet again. I ask her to come out on the porch with me, but she says she is tired and wants to call her boyfriend and go to bed. My wife gets up early and takes care of the kids, and it's my job to handle the night shift, so she's in bed at this point. I decide that I don't have the guts to do this alone, so I put on a movie and relax in my recliner. I end up falling asleep, then wake up at 3 a.m. to a noise coming from my niece's room. It sounds like a deep voice, and I knock on the door. I call out several times, but get nothing in response. I figured it must be her video and decided to let it be. I head to bed, and just as I start to pass out, another loud bang happens. I wake up and hear what sounds like something skittering on the wall outside of my bedroom. Understand that this is way up in the air and physically impossible. I look out the window but don't see anything. After going out and checking on this bang multiple times over the last year and seeing nothing, I decide to forget it and go back to sleep. The next day, my niece comes out and tells me that she had the shadow thing happen again, except this time she left her light on. She said she woke up to get that feeling again. She said that when she opened her eyes, she could see an extremely tall, shadowy figure standing over the top of her. She said it was moving closer to her, and just as she started to see the details of its face, she turned around in a panic, but nothing was there. She said the eyes haunted her, but didn't want to elaborate any further. The next morning, for the first time, my niece is up bright and early. I noticed she looked anxious as she told me that she was headed home for the 4th of July weekend and would be back on Tuesday. I ask her if she is okay, and she says yes, and quickly walks out the door. Later that day, I got a call from my sister telling me that she won't be coming back. I ask her if everything is all right, and she says yes, that she just wants to enjoy the rest of her summer. A little while later, I get a call from my niece telling me that she doesn't want to work here anymore, as she can't handle the anxiety from whatever is out there. She doesn't elaborate more than that, but whatever has been going on in her room has her petrified. I checked on her room and noticed that she had been sleeping with one of the windows wide open. This window is perfectly accessible from the outside. I don't know what's been going on to her, but whatever it is, it looks like it could have been coming into the room. Fast forward to the 4th of July. I do fireworks out front of our property by the road facing the woods. Due to what's been happening at night, I decided to do them before it got dark outside. We do our fireworks, and just as it starts getting dark, I get everyone inside. After a couple of hours, I remembered that my hose was still on the ground and lying out by the road. I head out to clean everything up and put the hose away. While I am doing this, I notice it's dead silent again, minus the distant sound of fireworks in the distance. The hairs on the back of my neck go up, and I get the feeling that I am being watched again. I hurried and coiled the hose and ran back into the house. I swear I am starting to wonder if it's just my mind playing tricks on me at this point. Story 5. Every night a different person walks down the street and screams for help. We aren't allowed to help them. Looking back, I feel dumb, completely stupid. I should have known that apartment was far too cheap to be right, even for a studio. I should have known there had to be a catch. The day I moved in was a complete blur. I insisted that no one help me, not wanting to prove any of my family members' suspicions about my character. By late afternoon, all my muscles ached terribly and my head throbbed. I fell back on my bare mattress, staring up at the ceiling fan with glazed-over eyes. I pulled the damp strands of hair from my sweaty forehead, wincing in disgust. Someone knocked on my door, causing me to jump. I cursed under my breath, pushing myself up on my elbows. 2 girls were peeking around my doorframe. Foolishly, I had left it wide open, forgetting the old college rule. Only leave your door open if you want to make new friends. And I was not in the mood to make new friends. One of them, an Asian girl with choppy black hair, was grinning at me. The other stood a little further back, fingering a box of Marlboro Reds. "Hey," she said, nodding at me. Her voice was smooth and raspy at the same time. "Did you just move in?" I laid back down, rubbing my face with both hands, choosing not to bother with manners. Yeah, about 5 seconds ago. Cool. The girls walked in, evidently ignoring my very clear body language. The girl with the black hair ran her fingers along the edge of my desk and then picked up a little ceramic duck from my unpacked box of trinkets. "Grandma," I explained, feeling strangely defensive. "Cute," she replied, holding it up to her face. "Has anyone told you yet?" the other girl asked abruptly, looking around my apartment. She had tucked the cigarettes into the back pocket of her jeans and was now tugging at her long red braids. "Jesus, Gianna, give her a second." "Well, she needs to know." "Yeah, but we haven't even asked her name." I blinked at the two strangers incredulously. I hadn't even had time to put toilet paper in my bathroom, and here they were, touching my things and talking about me like I wasn't there. I just wanted to take a nap, honestly. "My name's Arden," I said. The girl with the red braids, Gianna, sat down next to me on my bed. "Did they tell you?" "Tell me what?" "Oh, of course they didn't. The rules." I blinked again, my face blank. I didn't know about any rules besides the typical renting ones. I had signed the lease after, at best, skimming over it. The landlord was a skinny woman who smelled of ashes, and I was fairly certain she had never developed the facial muscles necessary for smiling. I wasn't about to ask her any follow-up questions, especially when the rent was so cheap. The other girl laughed nervously. "Where did you move here from?" I ignored her. "What rules?" Gianna got a strange, wicked sort of smile on her face, bouncing a little on my mattress. The other girl sighed loudly. "Something happens here every night," she began, pulling out my rickety office chair and sitting down. "Something weird." "Like what?" I sat up, frowning at her. Finally, my interest was piqued. "Someone walks down the street," Gianna said, her voice reminding me of a camp counselor telling a scary story around the bonfire. "That one, right down there," she pointed at my window. "It's someone different each night. They scream for help for about an hour. But we aren't supposed to help them." I just stared at her. I felt a small chill run up my spine. I didn't know what to make of all this. "It happens at a different time every night," the other one said softly. "We never know when it's coming." "Why?" She shrugged almost sadly. "We don't know why," I scoffed, leaning my elbows against my knees. "I don't believe you." The girl shrugged. "You don't have to. You'll see for yourself." The look in her eyes made me want to believe her. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't even begin to fathom what they were saying being true. It was too strange, too outlandish. I knew this wouldn't be the nicest neighborhood, but it couldn't be that bad. It had to be a prank. They had to be hazing me or something. "We'll come back later," Gianna said matter-of-factly. "We'll show you." Before I could protest, she grabbed the other girl by the wrist and they were gone. I followed them to the door, watching them march down the hall, talking to each other in hushed voices. I closed my door behind them. That night, as promised, they came back. They came dragging along two boys. One was somewhat muscular, wearing a tight black t-shirt and baggy jeans, and my eyes were instantly drawn to a silver heart-shaped locket around his neck. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Will when he walked in. The other boy was smaller but chubbier and nervous-looking, with a buzz cut and ill-fitting cargo shorts. His name, I was told, was Matteo. The girl named Gianna came in carrying a bottle of wine and that same slightly crumpled box of cigarettes. The other one, the girl I still didn't know the name of, was the only one who looked even somewhat apologetic. They all sat down on my dusty floor next to the window and motioned for me to join them. I sat between Will and the nameless girl, unsure whether I should continue feeling violated or if I should just give in to my strange, pushy neighbors. "Do you all live in this building?" I asked, hesitantly accepting the wine when it was passed to me. "Yeah," Will answered with a grin. It seemed half-hearted. "This building is where all the young people live." "It's where they put us," Gianna cut in, lighting a cigarette. It didn't even occur to me to tell her not to smoke inside. "We've all been sorted out. Forgive her. She's a bit of a conspiracy theorist." "It's not a theory," she snapped, glaring at him. "Look at the other ones. Next door, the Middle Ages, people with kids but no grandkids. Across the street, old people. Not a single 20-something in that entire building." "May, tell him." So, her name was May. I looked her over, admiring her smoky eye makeup and how she'd tied her hair up, long strands poking out like exploding fireworks. "Stop it," May muttered, reaching for the wine bottle. "You'll scare her." "I'm not scared." She just shrugged at me as if she didn't believe me. We passed the bottle around and then around again. I listened to them bicker and laugh. It was clear they'd all been friends for a while, and I felt a little bit like I was intruding even though they were in my apartment. Will asked me if I had gone to college, and I told him I did, but I dropped out. They all nodded sympathetically, which made me feel stupid. By midnight, I was a little bit buzzed, and my guard was beginning to fall. I had to admit, it felt good to have friends. I had already mentally resigned myself to a life of solitude, at least for a while, but it seemed that might not have been my fate. I laughed at Matteo and Gianna's drunken argument, passing a cigarette back and forth with May and blowing the smoke out of my open window. I had almost completely forgotten why they were all over when it happened. All at once, a blaring alarm came from each of our phones, like an Amber Alert. I could hear the sound echo throughout the neighborhood like an entire chorus of hundreds of phones going off, not just ours. I nearly leaped out of my skin. Not even Gianna laughed. All of them went quiet and they looked at me as I took it out, frowning at the screen. "Do not interfere." "It's coming," Will whispered. He had changed, his eyes almost glassy and his voice soft and shaky. Matteo squeezed his shoulder. I looked at May. Her eyebrows were cinched together in concern, and she was stubbing out our cigarette against the windowsill, shrinking away. There it was again, that chill. It crept up my back, spreading along my scalp and making me shiver. Something felt deeply, deeply wrong. The others were quiet now, staring silently at the window I was sitting up against. The air felt somehow warmer, like it was buzzing with something. Or maybe I was just sweating. We sat there, unmoving, for what felt like half an hour. Right as I was getting tempted to ask what was going on, I heard it. It was far away and faint, but I still heard it, a cry. It continued as it got gradually closer, louder, more desperate. "Help! Please, my God, someone help me!" Slowly, I leaned out the window. I had to see it with my eyes, had to confirm there was someone out there like they had said there would be. My new apartment was on the 4th floor, so it was hard to see who was down on the street without squinting. In the flickering streetlights, I could make out the outline of an elderly man. He was hunched over, wandering from door to door, wearing only what looked like a hospital gown to cover his pale, broken body. Behind him trailed a path of dripping blood, although I couldn't see where it was coming from. "Please, I'm hurt." I looked back at the others, my mouth hanging open. "What is this?" I demanded loudly. "What the hell is this?" May touched my arm, trying to calm me down. I pulled away from her. "Arden, please. We have to help him." "Why can't we help him? He's just an old man." "We can't help him. Trust me." I ignored her, leaning further out the window, prepared to call out to him. Before I could open my mouth, I froze. The man down there was still now facing our building. His head was tilted upwards. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was looking right at me. I immediately felt cold, like I was plummeting into ice water. "Help me!" he whimpered into the silent night air, his voice barely audible. Then he began to scream. That scream wasn't human, or at least not any human I had ever met. It was desperate, agonized. It made my stomach turn and my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't look away. The blood was coming from his arms, or I should say, his lack of arms. Where his arms should have been there were only bloody, mangled stumps. They looked fresh. He didn't move other than a shaky sway, and his eyes didn't leave me. His shriek slowly molded into words that I could just barely understand. "Please, please, please, please." May yanked me backward away from the window. I landed on my arse and yelped in pain and horror. "What is that thing?" I whispered. I didn't mean to whisper, but that was all that came out. "We don't know," May replied, her eyes trained on Will, who was crying now. Matteo held on to him like he might topple over. "We just know to follow the rules." "What happens if you don't follow the rules?" I asked, and immediately regretted it. Will sobbed softly. Outside, the old man wailed. Gianna reached over and pulled the window shut, but it somehow did nothing to muffle the blood-curdling sound. "Do you want to tell her, or should I?" Matteo asked Will. Will just shook his head. He was clutching his locket now, turning the little heart over between his fingers. Matteo sighed and turned towards me. "A couple of months ago, one of them got to Will's girl." "Shannon?" Gianna butted in. "Her name was Shannon." "Is?" "Sorry, her name is Shannon." I swallowed, but whatever I did, nothing would force down the lump in my throat. "What happened?" Matteo shook his head. "We don't know. We were all together when the screaming started. Usually, we just ignore it now, no use in dwelling on it. But that night, we think she saw something different. She started insisting she had to help, and she ran outside." "We couldn't stop her." He paused, glancing over at Will. He was silent and still. The screaming outside had begun to pass, getting softer as it continued further down the street. "Then what?" He shrugged. "Nothing. She was just gone." I pressed my lips together, trying to process all of this. I had believed they were messing with me, but I had seen it, I had witnessed it. And it terrified me. "Why doesn't anyone leave?" He shrugged for a second time. "Can't afford it, or people just don't care. Some people have left, but we all signed an NDA with the lease, so nobody ever knows." I frowned, thinking back to signing the paperwork, trying to remember. I could vaguely picture what he was talking about. I had just assumed it was more legal jargon that I would never understand. Had I seriously signed a non-disclosure agreement without even noticing? After that, I told them I wanted to go to bed. I needed time to process all of this. They understood, and each one of them said goodbye before leaving me alone. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, for some strange reason I thought of Me's face when we had realized it was happening. How she'd put out the cigarette and backed away from the window. Eventually, I was able to drift off to sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent more and more time with my new neighbors. I came to find that they were right. I didn't think there was a single person older than 30 in our entire building, but I saw them all the time leaving the one next door. Settling in was difficult. The others seemed so used to it. They cared, of course. It scared them. Especially Will. But you could tell they had been here a while by the way they sighed, closing the blinds and focusing harder on whatever they were doing. Eventually, I began to mimic them. It helped a little bit to pretend it was normal, as strange as that sounds. Moving out wasn't an option for me anyway. I was a college dropout and I hadn't found a job yet. I was still just getting by on what I had managed to save up. Every night, it was someone different. Some were more human, some seemed less. Some were drenched in blood, their clothes ripped and strange, but some looked fairly normal. The worst were the children. They would run like injured chickens, screeching and banging on doors, begging for help. Sometimes they would try different things and say different things. Like, "They're coming." Like, "I don't want to die." Or even, "I'm sorry." There were a lot of children. One night, while I was half awake, an alarm went off. It wasn't like the one on our phones, it was blaring. Only somewhat muffled by my window. My apartment glowed a flashing red from outside. I didn't even look. I was too scared of what I might see. I just covered my head with my pillow and tried to fall back asleep. I came to learn all of the theories, especially from Gianna. She thought we had all been chosen and predetermined to live here, all for some sick little government game. She thought maybe people were betting on the different buildings, putting down money on who would interfere the least. "See that?" she said to me one day in the hallway, returning from a coffee run. Cameras everywhere. I didn't know if I believed her. I spent time with May, mostly. We smoked on the front steps and people watched. It was strange to see what at night was such a sinister and gruesome neighborhood during the day, bright and lively. She didn't talk much about the rules, so I didn't either. We didn't talk all that much in general, I found. Just enjoy. It started with a birthday cake. "Happy birthday." As May walked through the door, Matteo blew into his plastic party horn. The paper inflated, smacking Will on the side of the head. May's hand flew to her heart. "Jesus Christ, you fuckers know I hate surprises." Gianna laughed and walked over to her. In her hands she held a chocolate cake, haphazardly adorned with sprinkles and bright pink icing that read, "Happy Birthday Me," in the center. 24. She set down the cake on the dresser and threw her arm around May's neck. "How does it feel?" Fucking awful. That's the spirit." "Enough of this," Matteo cut in, weaving between them. "Let's eat some cake, then let go." Their tradition, I had learned, was to bar hop for birthdays. They told me there was no curfew here, despite the rules, just a recommended time to be home, which was 10:30 p.m. Usually, they said, they got home before the alarm or spent the night somewhere else. We all had some cake. The boys took shots in the kitchen to pregame while I watched Gianna fuss over May's hair. I was never much of a partier. While at clubs or bars in college, I spent most of the time out back, chatting with the smokers. But then again, I was never much of a friend group person either, so maybe the circumstances were changing. I watched them all troop outside to Matteo's car. I stuffed myself in the back, incredibly conscious of how close I was pressed into me, my other shoulder rammed into the car door. Matteo's music, cranked up to maximum volume, hurt my ears, and the tiny space was packed with the smell of tobacco and various perfumes as we sped down the freeway toward the city. But it was nice. It was nice. I found myself laughing with them, and I hooked my arm around May's when she weaseled her hand beneath my elbow. It was nice. As predicted, the bars they chose weren't exactly my scene. But this time, as opposed to college, I could stand it. I took shots, I followed them out for smoke breaks, and I even danced under the low purple lights until my feet ached inside my chunky heels, surely riddled with blisters. By the time we got to our third bar, I couldn't even feel it anymore. And it was at that third bar that we crammed ourselves into an old photo booth. Gianna reluctantly offered $5 to the slot, and we laughed, red-faced, into a tiny camera. After the photos spit out into the compartment, the others slid through the red curtains. But before I could follow, May grabbed my wrist. She held me back, sliding her long baby blue nails up my wrist. I shivered. "You never gave me a birthday present," she whispered, and I could feel her breath on my face. If I was wearing my glasses, they would have been fogging up. Yeah, well, I didn't get to finish my quip before she kissed me. It was nice, and then it wasn't. "Hey!" Will called out to me, squeezing through a crowd of men wearing tattered leather jackets to get to me. "Arden, where's everybody else?" I blinked, looking around. I could have sworn they had been right there a second ago, but now none of them were anywhere to be found. I shrugged. "Dunno. Why? What's up?" He finally broke free from the swaying mass, and I got a better look at him. He looked worried. His face was flushed, and I could see a few drops of sweat creeping out from his hairline. He took his phone out of his pocket and held it out to me. First, I saw his home screen. It was him next to a girl with strawberry blonde hair, both clutching beer bottles and grinning widely at the camera. Then I looked where he wanted me to. The time, 1:47 a.m. "It's getting late," he narrated. "Can we find the others and get going?" I understood then. He was worried. It was past 1 a.m. and no alarm yet. It was later than usual. The bars would start closing soon. He wanted to get back before it happened. Will and I weaved through the crowd. I was pretty buzzed, and I realized I was having a hard time moving my feet right, which made me feel embarrassed. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Was I that much of a lightweight? We found them outside, chain-smoking. Will explained the situation while I swayed. The drive back was strangely tense. Mateo's music was turned down, and there wasn't any joking or boisterous gossiping like there had been on the way out. We all felt it. It didn't need to be said. Something was off. Will drove fast, almost recklessly. In the dark, May took my hand, just as he was careening around the last corner, and we could almost make out the shape of our apartment building down the street. It happened. All of our phones went off at once. Gianna let out a small shriek from the other side of the back seat. "Do not interfere." Mateo turned back towards us, pressing his finger to his lips. Had this ever happened before? By their reactions, I didn't think so. It was different when it came. I was in my bedroom when I could just shut the curtains and put my headphones on. I felt so small and helpless then, like I was gazing into the maw of something incomprehensibly beyond my understanding. I felt like we were all flies, and this neighborhood right now was the spider's web. We'll drive slowly now, maybe 5 miles an hour. We were all still, we were all silent. Not even a stray breath cut through the quiet. Underneath the glowing streetlights, I could make out the side of Will's face. He was pale, and if I hadn't seen his knee shifting as he pressed down on the brakes, I could have mistaken him for a mannequin. The car came to a stop. I followed his gaze all the way down the street to the dark horizon, and I saw what he saw. A silhouette. It was far too distant to make out what shape it took, but it was humanoid. It moved in a shaky stumble, limping down the middle of the road in our direction. And in the overwhelming silence, I could hear it, far away but still deeply urgent. "Help me, Will," Gianna hissed. "Turn the car around." Will didn't move. He just stared forward, as white as paper. It didn't make any logical sense, but I knew what he knew. It was too late now. There was no use. "Help me, please help." I could tell now that it was a girl from its voice and its figure as it got closer. It was wearing some sort of white nightgown, not unlike the old man's hospital attire from that first night, stained with dark red blood. From here, I couldn't tell if it was fresh or dry. I didn't know why that mattered to me. "Maybe," May whispered. Her arm shook against mine. "Maybe if we're quiet and we duck down, it won't see us." Deep down, it felt as hopeless as turning around had felt, but it seemed reasonable. I nodded and did as she suggested, crouching behind the passenger seat, my knees throbbing from the strange angle I'd bent myself into. We all did it, except for Will. He didn't move, he still just looked. When he finally spoke, I could barely hear him, it was so weak. Shannon. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Matteo was the one to break the silence. "What? Shannon?" he repeated, finally turning to look at his friend. "That's Shannon." I peered over the seat in front of me, squinting my eyes. The human-like thing was getting closer, and now I could make out strawberry blonde hair, round face, short legs. The girl from Will's phone lock screen. The girl who had disappeared. Shannon May gasped next to me. "Dude," Matteo said slowly, his words crumbling as soon as they left his mouth. "I know what you're thinking, dude. Do not get out of this car." Will didn't even seem like he was with us anymore. He was in shock, I think, looking back. "I have to help her," he insisted, right as another sickening cry rang out. "Help me, help me, please, someone, it hurts." It was getting far too close to us for comfort, but it still didn't seem to notice the car. Its cries became more and more desperate as they got louder. "I have to help her," Will repeated, and a bit of life had returned to his face. Matteo shook his head and grabbed at his sleeve. "Will, that is not Shannon." Will glared at him, his eyes shining with tears. "I know Shannon. That's her. I know you do, dude, and I know you miss her, but please, please don't do this." Their voices were getting louder and more distraught, and I felt May press into my side, trembling like a leaf. Gianna was whimpering, but I couldn't see her from my position. The thing was almost to our car when it stopped. She turned her head, left, then right, almost like she was sniffing the air. The boys stopped arguing. I felt like my heart would burst out of my chest. I could see Shannon's face now, and I realized why she hadn't seen us. The girl's face was streaked with gore, and it looked like her eyes had been scooped out with a melon spoon. She cried, drool pouring from her slackened mouth, but no tears could come. It happened too quickly. None of us could stop him. Will violently ripped his arm away from Matteo, fumbling for the handle of the car door. Gianna screamed. Matteo tried to slam down on the lock, but he missed, and Will managed to get the door open before he could try again. He stumbled onto the asphalt and hit the ground with a soft crunch. The thing turned her head and began to scream, but instead of charging at Will, she backed away. She held her arms out in front of her like something might attack her, whipping her head around wildly. An alarm went off, like the one I had heard that one night, but far more unbearable now that I was in it. The streetlights lining either side of the street switched to a flashing red, and Matteo threw himself into the driver's seat, the tires screeching as he peeled away. Gianna was screaming at him, pleading with him to go back. May was weeping into her hands. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I didn't understand. As we sped away, I looked back. I couldn't help it. I saw the flash of some sort of van in the blinding red light, pulling around the corner. Then nothing. That was a week or two ago. I don't know. I've been having a hard time keeping track of time. None of us have spoken much since that night. We tried the police, of course, but as you could assume, nothing came of it. I think whatever this is far larger than we know. I don't know if it's some kind of experiment or just a sick game, but I'm going to move back into my parents' house next week, despite all their berating, and then figure out what to do from there. I don't know if that was Shannon that we saw that night, or if it was something else, and I don't know which is worse. All I know is that last night I heard Will's voice outside my window, crying, pleading for help, I didn't interfere. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed these creepy stories. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the channel. See you in the next video.